There's a picture of the cemetery, too, in my book. That became an important memory as I wrote the story of my fictitious Amala. Well, characters, plot, locale were coming along, but I realized that I had an important challenge. Some years back, I had admired the reconciliation work of the Belfast Children's Summer Program. They brought children from embattled Northern Ireland and placed them as a Catholic and a Protestant pair in a home in the United States. The idea was to expose them to a pleasant and neutral environment where they could get to know each other as people, not enemies. More recently, I have visited the summer camp where Seeds of Peace does similar work, bringing teenagers from areas of conflict to a camp in Maine. There the young people interact with each other, learning each other's stories, with the hope that finding commonality will aid understanding and perhaps lead to reconciliation. And as a matter of fact, it sometimes has. But then I had to ask myself, could I write about such things? Well, my Bosnian experiences at that point seemed like an unassembled jigsaw puzzle, and my task was to solve the puzzle. The plot was forming, the characters were shaping up, but there were still questions, and one was, where would it take place? There had been a few war-provoking incidents in Sarajevo in the spring of 1992, but Sarajevo was overdone in literature and films. I wanted a smaller, less well-known locale, but one that had been important in the war. It was in Bijeljina, a predominantly Muslim town in the northeast portion of Bosnia, about 10 kilometers from the Serbian border, that the war was really launched in the 1st of April 1992. Arkan, the commander of Arkan's Tigers, a Serb militia, took over the town. So it is in Bijeljina that my story begins. To try to assure accuracy in my novels, I do site visits. So in November 2005, I went with a friend back to Bosnia to check things out. We traveled by bus to Banja Luka, Sarajevo, Tuzla, Bijeljina, Belgrade. My friend was indispensable because her interpreter in Bijeljina in 1998 was a bright young man named Dalibor. On our study trip, he was our host and my guide to a town where I had only previously changed buses, so I needed the information. He patiently drove us around, answered my questions, and took us to his grandparents' house, where his grandmother, his baka, served us delicious sarma. So it was fairly easy to work out the situations of Amala and her Muslim family who lived in Bijeljina and how they dealt with the attack and the subsequent war. It was harder to create the destiny of Sanja and her Serbian family, who remained there as the war moved south and west. My research turned up military activity by Muslim forces south along the Drina River Valley, and some subsequent atrocities suffered by Serbs who lived there. There were also the stories of the Serbs like Vida, who had been forced out of Sanski Most in Krajina. Like Seeds of Peace, I think there are two or more sides to a story. In Bosnia Mosaic, I present a world collapsing. What are the personal responses of individuals at a time like that? How do they cope? When later they pick up the pieces, how do they relate to one another? My story was about families on both sides of the conflict, well, two sides of the conflict, and it was essential that their experiences be balanced. They had to try to get past the fear, anger, and suspicion created by the war. And they had to try to develop understanding and compassion for one another. But could they? It was their challenge, and mine. Of all the interpreters I had, the one who cared the most about family, peace, and people was Mersiha. The moment we met and she corrected my pronunciation of her name, I recognized her feisty spirit and knew that we would be friends. She was special to me then, and she will always be special to me. That was on my 4th time in Bosnia in the fall of 1998, when Hussein was my driver. Merciha at 17 was beautiful, though a little bit pudgy, and full of fun. She was devoted to her family and friends, especially to her mother, and she was devoted to me. When we got in a tricky situation at night and Hussein and I were going to be driving out, I suggested she not go with us. She raised her head proudly and said, "Of course I will come. It's my job to take care of you." Well, when I returned home, we kept up an active correspondence. And in 2000, Merciha was in college in Sarajevo, and my brief visit there gave us an opportunity to continue our friendship in person. She was slimmer, more sophisticated. She'd cut her hair, toned down the red. She was planning a visit to her aunt and uncle and cousins in St. Louis. Of course, she would come to see me. Then the phone call came from her aunt, and it was a shock. Merciha had been killed in an auto accident. Twice since then, on personal visits, I have knelt with her mother at her grave. My book is dedicated to her. An old Boshand who has read Bosnia Mosaic said the story transported him to Bosnia again. He felt like he had heard these stories from people as he had worked there, and he also felt like he was actually walking through the town of Bijeljina as I described it. That was gratifying to hear because I really wanted to write with authenticity. I also felt pleased when a member of my writers group here in Maryland said of Bosmos, as we casually refer to it, that it is timely and timeless. She said that it isn't just about Bosnia, but it's about political, racial, cultural, ethnic, cultural, or political differences, all those differences, wherever they may occur. I do want to acknowledge the tremendous gifts of time and talent from my team, my family, Dwayne, Denise, and Doug, and Lisa, and my friend Peggy, writer, artist, and owner of a Sir Speedy print shop in Rockville. Peggy contributed much, including the cover of the book. I also want to say how much I owe to the people now fondly known as the Boz Bunch, who first became my friends in Bosnia. Although we seem to have settled out at 20 or so for reunion attendees, because so many of our folks are in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and Macedonia. In the past, as many as 70 people have come from DC and a dozen states. We had our 11th reunion this year. To you I say, Havala. Thank you for your interest and your attention. Thank you.